Call the May meeting of the Community Development, Housing, and General Government Committee to order. We have general agenda and consent agenda. Are there items on the consent agenda from the committee or from council members present that they would like to pull from consent?
C1 and C2.
C1 and C2.
Yes.
Any others?
I'll make a motion to approve the ballots.
Second.
That's been moved and properly second. Questions? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed likewise.
Aye.
That's unanimous. Let's go to item C1.
Item C1, resolution to name the Strollway Bridge over Salem Creek located in the South Ward.
All right, is there, who will speak on that? Okay.
Mr. Royston, I just want the public to basically just hear a little bit about why this is and who is the person that this is being named for.
Yes, Councilmember Adams. We were approached by Councilmember Larson with a wonderful idea to name the Strollway Bridge after former Councilmember Molly Light. She was a big proponent for recreation for the city, dedicated a lot of years of service to making the South Ward a better environment for the citizens. The letter was provided sent to me from Councilmember Larson. We took it to our Recreation and Parks Commission, who also approved the recommendation, and we think it would be an honor to name the Strollway Bridge after her and after all that she's done for the city of Winston-Salem.
Thank you.
Councilmember Larson?
Yeah, I appreciate you pulling this. I hadn't trying to be quiet today. Molly Light, of course, is my predecessor, and she has been, of course, incredibly involved in a variety of environmental issues, and particularly she worked at the YWCA. She's on council for 13 years, did 3 terms. So basically, you guys got cheated 1 year, as I remember. That worked out. And so she had 3 good terms and was very involved in the Strollway particularly and urban streams and urban creeks. I worked with her on several of those while I was at Old Salem, and thinking something that she would appreciate the value of is a bridge that goes across Salem Creek and connects basically over to the YWCA and is a connector within the city. And we like connections in the city. And so that seemed an appropriate thing to name after her.
All right. Councilmember Best?
This is that little truss-style bridge.
Exactly. Thank you. It's the wooden bridge. That's the small one. Yeah.
All right. Any other comments? Is there a motion?
I move for approval.
Second. That's been moved and properly second. Any questions on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed likewise. That's unanimous. Congratulations, Councilmember Light. Will she be here is she invited for Monday? Will we have come on Monday?
We will hope to have a ceremony on
Okay,
site,
on site.
which
Okay.
we would invite everybody to come to.
Yeah.
That'd be nice.
Yeah. Item C2.
Item C2, resolution regarding the eligibility of the following properties for the National Register of Historic Places: R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company Buildings 2-1 and 2-2, 951 Reynolds Boulevard, located in the North Ward.
Councilmember.
Yes.
Thank you, Councilmember Abshad.
Yes. Ms. McCullough, please give us a small overview of the importance of this next historic designation in the city, please.
Great. Thank you, council members. This is a National Register eligibility review and recommendation. The final board that it will go to is the National Register Advisory Committee. If you have any questions, Councilperson Larson, I just think you stepped off a little bit ago. This is one of the perks we get for being a certified local government community, so we get to review these, and so that is one of the perks about it. This property, the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company Buildings 2-1, 2-2, which are connected, is really kind of a continuation of our Reynolds history. They're mid-century buildings, and they're the best we can find that are built kind of built that way. They are being listed under architecture, So, and I think that is important because it continues that story through history. I think historic buildings and, historic preservation isn't just about the ye oldies, you got to be a Moravian, not that there's anything wrong with that here, but you can do things up into it. So I think this is very important, leading other people to realize that even mid-century modern properties can also be historic. So we are venturing into the 50s, so the 30s and the 50s. So, any questions? I do have some photos if you want to look, but.
I don't know if Ms. Adams can answer this or you. Is this one of the pieces of property that was transferred from Reynolds to the Whitaker Park Authority?
Yes.
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 Okay, thank you. Glad to see we're moving forward.
Do you have a photo that you can
I do.
put up
I can
so
bring it
people
up
can
real
see
quick
it?
if you
Because
just set it.
everybody doesn't really know.
Yep. Because we'll do a public hearing at your meeting, so this will kind of show you. Let me. Okay.
The one where it shows them close up.
This
You have
gives
one
you
of-
kind of an aerial view, so you can kind of see where the buildings are located in the Whitaker Park area. These are the two buildings, and I'm going to move through
Yeah.
So these are the buildings.
They're connected?
And they're connected by a little connector.
on the
Yeah.
inside.
These are the interiors.
Okay.
And they're examples of our most intact mid-century, 20th mid-century tobacco leaf houses remaining in Winston-Salem. So that have fire-resistant industrial design.
Yeah. Thank you. Just a comment again. When they built Whitaker Park, the manufacturing campus, that's what we refer to it now as a campus because it's so much to it. But those were the oldest buildings in the area at that time. And then they built Whitaker Park, and then they built the manufacturing plant, and then they added on to the manufacturing plant, and then they built the research and development across the street, and then they later built the University Center, which most people know as the Pepsi Aon building, and that sort of thing. I'm just happy and glad, thank you, that we have a designation on that area, in that area right now. And I was wondering, maybe I missed this, how old is the cemetery across the street from these buildings? The one that we have 400 and something graves.
Is that Woodlawn or Evergreen?
Woodlawn.
How old? I have the data at my desk, but I don't have it in my head, unfortunately. So I can look that up and give it to you. Yeah.
Please. Thank you. Thank you.
Unfortunately, dates in my head don't.
I move for
McIntyre.
approval.
I understand
Oh,
somebody who's
sorry.
looking at this for a project that they would hopefully be using historic tax credits on, so this gets them further along. This is an aid to them to help make that project more viable.
Right, and these are the tax credits through the state and the federal government. These aren't the tax deferrals through like our landmark program.
Right.
So
That's why I haven't said anything.
excuse me.
Thank you.
Is there a motion?
I move for approval.
That's been moved and properly second. Any questions? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed likewise. All right. Move to our general agenda. We have two great groups with us here today. G1, we have our College Advisory Board Annual Report.
Item G1, College Advisory Board Annual Report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Two for the press.
Front page. Nice.
All right, so good afternoon, council members. My name is Richard Caban-Cabero. I'm a graduating senior at Wake Forest University. This is my second year as chair of the College Advisory Board.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Leslie Luna. I'm a student at Salem College. I'm a senior, and this is my first year as a College Advisory Board member.
So this year, with the when the College Advisory Board began, I and two other members, Ms. McCann and Vonnie White, facilitated a training. The first newsletter, which you'll see in hand, it's the fall newsletter, helped contextualize what our respective college communities were up to in the fall, with Misbah and Shanae writing articles about Winston-Salem Pride and an international dinner highlighting the diversity of our respective college communities.
So this was my first year as a college advisory board member, and so in the fall I was introduced to the rest of my peers, and we were all very excited to be a part of something creative, part of something with the potential to bring college communities together. And so during our meetings, we exchanged ideas and challenged one another with the intention of doing something impactful this year as members.
One of my hopes as chair this year was to create a greater sense of community within the organization through engagement. So this year we had a greater amount of engagement than last year. With the help of Wanda Allen Abraha and Jamie Waldeck, we facilitated the collegiate trust talks between students, campus police officers, and the Winston-Salem Police Department. Reflections on this event can be found in the fall newsletter, and that article is written by Simeon Shore, if you were curious. And we also worked on several different opportunities with the Youth Advisory Council, which will be after us. And that is referenced on page 7 of a report that you got earlier. The capstone to our project this year was the All Hands on Deck Collegiate Day of Service. And we worked with various nonprofits serving the Winston-Salem community.
So we did this because we knew the impact that volunteering has in communities, especially this one. The 4 organizations that we chose were Old Salem NC Diaper Bank, the Salvation Army, and the City of Winston-Salem Recreation and Parks. I've personally volunteered at the Salvation Army, and I knew the importance of that organization in this community as far as the impact of this shelter, the Boys and Girls Club, and also the impact that volunteers have to facilitate the sustainability of the organization itself. I had a wonderful time, and when I looked around, I saw the smiling faces of other volunteers, even hours into volunteering, so I'm sure they had a good time also.
So additional reflections on the Collegiate Day of Service can be found in the spring newsletter, which we just handed out, and that article is written by Simeon Cottrell. In a final reflection, I wrote, "As I leave the College Advisory Board, I look back on my time and am happy to have served as chair. My call to future chairs is that they work for a humanity greater than themselves." And I was applying the Pro Humanitate motto of Wake Forest University.
So to help this effort, we have outlined goals in the College Advisory Board next year, along with the recommendations, and we hope that the City Council continue to support the board's goals of building a stronger relationship with city officials.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Councilmember Clark?
Yeah. How much time did you spend kind of learning about the workings of local government?
Who, me?
No, in general, your group. Do you spend a lot of time learning about what we do as a city?
So throughout the year, we have opportunities to meet different people who work within this building and across the city within the government. So we had opportunities to meet with a transportation...
WISTA.
Yes, WISTA. Yes. There we go. And that happened last year and this year. We also, of course, through working with the Winston-Salem Police Department and having those trust talks, we had another opportunity. And some of the members were also involved in various efforts across the city for things like the sanctuary movement, last year HB2. So even outside of the College Advisory Board, students have been involved with getting to know how city government works.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Other comments?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, thank you for all of your efforts and your engagement that you all do consistently in the community. One thing I know, I think I may mention it every year, is just looking at the list of the colleges and universities listed there and looking at those that may be absent from there, and just with the School of the Arts and the absence of participation there. I know they have new provost at there. I don't know if it'd be, but I know the chancellor, but there's a new provost as well, I think. Maybe there's some opportunity in that side of engaging them just to have some more. And I know that their academic schedule and structure is different, but hopefully we can find ways to continue to engage School of the Art in some way.
And Councilmember Montgomery, just to address that point, we have already received nominations from the School of the Arts for the upcoming year, which is very encouraging.
Okay.
I did see in the group's recommendations to us that they're asking that we expand the group members to 4 members per school. So that speaks to what you were just saying. I don't, personally, the more the merrier. That's how I look at it.
And this year we had greater involvement from the students. There were about 4 people who stayed on until the end last year, and this year we had maybe 6 to 8.
Good.
Councilman McIntosh?
To Mr. Clark's point, is there an orientation period at the beginning of each year? I think it might serve a good purpose to maybe have some time to kind of understand how the city does work and work together, and that way may just make the path forward a little bit easier once, create a little bit more understanding of how things happen within the city government. I think that might be helpful.
Yeah, our orientation is pretty short, but I'm sure that we can do something about that and make sure that we know a little bit more about how the city governs.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you. And again, thank the council all those long years ago that when they decided to establish the College Advisory Board, when a young college student was sitting on the council. Mm-hmm. Item G2.
Item G2, Youth Advisory Council Annual Report.
Different. Fall. Two different ones.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, council members. My name is Jenna Barnes. I am a junior at Salem Academy, and this is my first year as a member of the Youth Advisory Council, and I have served this year as the head of the Government Affairs Committee. And Campbell just handed out to you all our spring and our fall newsletters for you to look over. So this year we applied for a state grant through the State Youth Council, and were awarded $500 towards our annual project, which we call Operation Caring for Kids, which we'll get more information on in just a minute. And we also received another $500 grant to promote our annual project from the Winston-Salem Foundation's Youth Grant Makers Association, which is a student-run organization that provides money for service projects for other student-led organizations. And so we're planning to use our grant money to buy items to fill the bags that we're using in our annual project. So with that being said, this year, like I had mentioned, our annual project is called Operation Caring for Kids, and we're focusing on creating bags of various items, fun things, and sort of necessities for children under the age of 18 that have at least one parent serving in the military. And so this is in partnership with the National Guard and the Army Reserves here in Winston-Salem, and we're donating gender-specific bags for elementary school, middle school, and high school ages. And we have set up donation boxes in our respective high schools to collect supplies, as well as reaching out to local businesses for donations. And we're going to use the grant money to supplement other things for us to add to the bags that we're putting together. And once we finish that, we plan on presenting them to the children that we have made them for.
Great.
All right. So good afternoon, council members. My name is Hunter Dameworth, and I am a 10th grader at Calvary Day School. This is my first year as a Youth Advisory Council member, and I am a member of the Government Affairs Committee. So besides focusing on the annual project, YAC has also participated and helped in many other activities around the city. One activity was holding the Children's Fun Area at this year's International Village. This included painting kids' faces and overseeing a play area. In addition, some YAC members have worked on campaigns involving children who are homeless and or hungry. This helped to increase the amount of youth present at the March for Homeless Children. Also, YAC helped the Human Relations Commission in being the host of the 37th Annual Human Relations Student Awards Banquet. At this banquet, YAC members greeted guests and seated them.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Campbell Turner, and I'm a junior at R.J. Reynolds High School. And the Youth Advisory Council still has a couple meetings planned for the rest of the year. Next Monday, on May 15th, we're planning to complete the rest of our annual project, and we will also be working with the Youth Grantmakers Association to pack the bags because they provided the funding for the project. And the council will also be holding elections for officer positions that day as well. And after we complete the work on the projects and the elections, we will all be attending your city council meeting that day. And this is an important experience for youth council members to learn about the local government. And the 2016-2017 Youth Advisory Council session will conclude with a final meeting on June 2nd, where members will gather to continue the tradition of repainting the Youth Expression Wall, which is over near the Milton Road Center. And there will be a new theme from the last one. That will be the last meeting for high school seniors who have begun thinking about younger students to replace them in the council for next school year. That concludes our presentation, and thank you, council members, for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any questions, comments?
I'm going to ask the same question Mr. McIntosh and I keep going back on. Did you have an opportunity to learn a lot about how the city works?
As the Government Affairs Committee, we have organized sitting in on the city council meetings, which we did back in March or April, I believe. And so as a group, we have done that. And then we've also had different members from certain organizations like the Bike Patrol Police come in to talk to us about their roles that they play in the city.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any others? All right, thank you. Thank you. Item G3.
Item G3, information regarding revisions to the Revitalizing Urban Commercial Areas Program Guidelines.
Good evening, Chairman Montgomery, members of the committee. In response to questions raised by Mayor and members of City Council a couple of months ago, I believe, regarding the operation of the RUCA program, the Office of Business Inclusion and Advancement initiated a review of the current guidelines in an effort to refine and enhance the policies and procedures that govern the program. In your package, you have a chart which provides an overview of the program guidelines as well as the suggested revisions. And I'd like to take a moment just to highlight a couple of the suggested revisions that you can find on that chart. The first of which is making available the remaining funds from the RUCA 3 allocation to all Tier 1 and Tier 2 areas and any Tier 3 area that is located within the NRSA. The second highlight is that we are suggesting limiting the number of requests for additional funds to once per project. We've also suggested restricting the ability of property owners to serve as the general contractor for their own project. And probably the most substantive change is the addition of a provision which would allow for funds to be used for the acquisition of property within a designated RUCA area. And it's staff's intent, based upon the direction from this committee, to bring an item in June for action. And we are seeking your direction relative to the changes that have been suggested. So with that, I'll pause and be happy to answer any questions.
All right. I know I have some comments, but are there any other questions or comments from the committee or council members present? Council members.
When you bring it back, it would be helpful to have the overlay map so we would know in which Tier 3 areas would be eligible. Thank you.
And that was actually part of the comment or suggestion I would have in terms of, although those are in the expanding to the NRSA, that maybe, I don't know if it makes sense to go ahead and tier them out into 4 groups in terms of those that will be in the NRSA in a Tier 3, and then those absent of that into a Tier 4, if that makes sense, in terms of how there could be an additional separation in there, because I don't think all of them are in the NRSA.
Right.
correct?
No. Actually, and to your question, Councilmember Bessie, if you look at the map, numbers 19 through 29, with the exception of number 21, would be included in this, in the definition of areas that would become newly eligible for funding.
19 through what?
19 through 29, with the exception of 21, would be that the additional RUCA areas that would become eligible. And 21, 30 through 33 fall outside of the NRSA, or will wholly fall outside the NRSA.
Because part of my question on that, on suggesting potentially an additional tiering, is just looking at the NRSA, and there's some ones that are in there, some that are not, like a comparable. Thruway and 14th and New Orchardtown are not comparable in the sense of that, but they would be in the same tier. And so in the sense of how we break that down to truly make sure those tiers are adequately separating who accesses funds from a need-based standpoint, because Thruway looks like business is going fairly well. And so,
yeah, we may need to read this.
I'd even put Reynolda Villages in here. You think Thruway's doing well?
yeah, and so that's what I was just saying, just how the tiering comes through. All right.
Actually, Reynolda is one of those that would fall outside the RSA, but
I was saying if we added that fourth category, potentially that could separate give it that separation, even beyond just using the NRSA as the line. If that was a fourth one, that could potentially do that. Any other comments?
Just want to say I'm always glad to see this particular initiative always moving forward for improvement. And we knew this years ago that this would be one of those areas that we would always probably come back periodically with changes to make it better, not just for the communities, but for hopefully the developers and or property owners within those neighborhoods. So, yeah.
Yeah, and Mr. McIntyre.
I think tightening up the rules, I know we had a couple of cases where there was some difference of opinion about how money was being spent. I think this is a great refresh of it. How do we measure success in the RUCA program? I mean, it seems to me that the goal of it is to act as a catalyst to spark redevelopment in an area. Do we have any metrics to say that it's working?
Councilmember, I think what you mentioned certainly is what we would hope to see as an outgrowth of our efforts. But my understanding is that it was primarily originated as a blight reduction strategy that could potentially, yes, have some economic spillover and see some advances in the broader areas. But at least in my understanding, I wasn't here at the time when it was founded. But I think one of the primary strategies was to make blighted commercial areas not be a drag on the areas that they were in, to improve the physical character of those particular locations.
Right, but the flip side of that is if we get rid of blight, we should see, the blight retards development, so we should see further development. So I'd be interested in seeing some sort of look at what we have seen so far as the returns on our fairly significant investment. How much money have we spent in RUCA? Anybody got that figure?
Probably close to 3 to 4 million at this point.
Well, we allocated $3 million in the last bond issue, and there have been.
But in terms of actually spent, somewhere in that north of 4 million, probably.
Because this is the second
round.
Go round.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Larson and Ms. Bessie.
Yeah, I'm pretty much lost with this, and I would appreciate a summary of how this program got started, how much money is there, where the projects have been placed in the by ward, and understanding whether we're going, this is something we anticipate continuing will be, I guess, something the board will discuss at some point. But I need that update. I don't really, I just need some help understanding. And that'll follow up on your request, is how do we measure success, so I can get up to speed. I would appreciate it.
We've got that. We can update that very quickly with lots of pictures and the history and how it was started. It was based on two criteria, vacancy rate and the physical conditions of the properties, how they were rated by planning initially. But we can bring you all that information.
We have good success stories with rehabilitating old buildings and derelict parts of town or whatever. I think that's something to brag about, and I'd like to see, you know, some photographic evidence of those projects and something. It sounds to me like we're not very cohesive in how we're presenting this project right now. I think there's a marketing thing about what we've accomplished with this, maybe.
Mr. Bessie?
Yeah, I was involved in originating the program, and the intent was a community economic development program. It was not simple, blight reduction. That was a benefit, but the intent was to target economic development to parts of the community that most needed it, and to begin that process by revitalizing commercial areas that served neighborhoods, or that would serve neighborhoods if they were restored and made more economically productive and active. So we do need to develop a metric that will measure that impact as well as the blight removal, blight reduction impact.
Some summary would be appreciated.
Any others? For me, I'm happy to see some of the recommendations that are coming forward, and then just in general the RUCA program as a whole. I think holistically, looking at RUCA in all the areas that it has been utilized, I think for the most part has been successful in terms of impacting certain neighborhoods and communities, in particular commercial areas. I would also advise, just from a holistic point, I asked the manager some time ago because I wanted to see some information, particularly in other areas where we've done economic investment concentrated like we attempt to do in RUCA. Well, what's the success rate where we've done, restaurants in certain areas where they're particularly examining downtown, where we've invested in restaurants downtown and those restaurants are no longer with us anymore, particularly for the point of there was some questioning on programmatic standpoint. And yes, I think there are some questions in some areas and how some deals will work, but in general, I think the program itself is structured in a way, and in its intent as well. I think there's some things that may need to continue to work on to improve upon it, but I think we have a pretty decent charge-off rate when it comes to some of the actual programs that we've had. And so when we think about downtown and downtown investment and business support there, we've done the same thing in RUCA attempts, I think, to do similar actions in parts of the community where there's economic depression that's weighing down some of those in the commercial areas there, help to boost that. And so we know that's just only one piece of the larger puzzle, often challenging some of those neighborhoods and communities. But I think one of the pieces here, and even in the ability for funds to be used and help acquire some of those properties, that you have some property owners who are unwilling to make investments. And if there's an ability to transition some ownership, sometimes that may give much more opportunity to that commercial area to see some growth and redevelopment. So that's one area in particular that I'm very much interested in, on how that will impact some of these communities. Because you got some folks that they don't want to invest and they don't want to do it, but they'd be willing to let their property go to let somebody else make that investment. Mr. Bessie and McIntyre.
One other comment is that a lot of the criticism of the program and some of the examples in the program is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what the intention is. Right. The comparison to the downtown revitalization effort is an excellent one, because that was a program in which the city targeted investment into an area not because of who was investing there, but because of the intent was to revitalize the center of the city and make that be an economic engine instead of an economic drag. Right. And what we have done with the RUCA program is we have attempted to target particular areas that are a drag on the communities that surround them, and flip that to where they become, an economic engine for that. Some places it's worked very well. Some places it hasn't worked. And we need to, every time we do one that works, we learn something there. Every time we do one that doesn't work, we learn something there. And we try to apply those lessons in the next round and in course corrections in some cases on particular projects that didn't work the first time. And we get the question, well, why are you going back and investing more in an area where your first round didn't work? It's because what we're trying to do is to revitalize that part of our community and bring them into sort of the economic prosperity of the city as a whole. We're not out to make a profit for the city. We're out to boost the community, and we understand that particular areas are going to be tougher to boost, and there are areas that the private investment community is not going to touch without incentive.
Councilman McIntosh, Councilman Adams.
The intent is very clear to me. I think. I mean, I go back to the economic catalyst of it, but just because that's the intent doesn't mean that we're affecting what we want to affect. So I want to see some measurement.
No, I think that's a good idea. I was speaking to the press, to tell you the truth.
So I mean, the restaurant row program, we had some failures there, but the end result of that is success. So I want to make sure with a limited amount of money that we have, and we always have a limited amount of money, that we make sure that we're spending it the best way possible. Intending to bring an area up is a lot more, actually bringing it up is a lot more difficult than it seems. So let's be targeted, and if we're going to spend this money, let's make sure we're spending it the best way.
Right, and be dedicated to the timeline, because in the sense of what we've seen in downtown, it didn't happen in 1 year and one investment. It happened over a period of time and a commitment. Councilman Adams, sorry.
Again, I think sometimes, like we said earlier, these types of programs are not going to fit in the same box that economic development initiative, community development fits. It's just not. This is an attempt by the city or some of us to get some type of initiatives to help uplift our communities. I'm like Ms. Burke now. I always go back to when I was young.
Tell us about the good old days.
Yeah, I am. I'm going to tell you about it. But my community didn't really look that much different than an Ardmore or those other older communities in the community. It didn't. But as time changed, it became blighted, boarded up buildings, and places where we had grocery stores on every corner in the neighborhoods I grew up in the 60s. We had shoe repair people, dry cleaners, doctors, lawyers, pharmacists. There was no reason for us to want to go anywhere. And even downtown, a part of it was black. I was much older, my teenage years, before I realized there was another part of downtown, because I always saw that area that was where the black people, black businesses again went. This particular deal with RUCA is a work in progress. It may be a work in progress as long as it took us to get the tumbleweeds out of downtown. A lot of you that are new to Winston, you think this just happened. Trust me, downtown dried up in the late 60s, early 70s. When they built Haynes Mall and Thruway and Northside and Parkway and Peters Creek and Renolda, nobody went downtown anymore. So what we're asking everybody, I understand, and Councilman McIntosh Larson, my counterparts that were here before you, they know I said we got to have some metrics. We have to. We got to be able to measure. We got to take pictures before and after. We got to have some kind of plan that we go by and look at and see what we did, how we did it, so if somebody else wants to do the same thing across town. But this whole project, it's not going to fit in a mold. We're just trying, again, you heard yesterday some of the citizens said that we spend money on everybody but the least of us. in our communities. And we didn't say that. We say that all the time. But when people are coming to tell us that, that's not just a perception, that's a reality to the inner city. So again, we can go and staff, and Mr. Garrity, you can update the report that you usually give us on a yearly basis. Update it, and again, take away, Mr. Raleigh, some of the suggestions that we now need, Mr. Brooks, we need to go look at some metrics as to how we do measure some degree of, it's not necessarily success, it's what lessons learned. I think I remember telling you all that. Just lessons learned. What did we learn from this project that's in the history of it that we can share with the newer council members and others that come on board so that they get an understanding of what we're trying to do. And we've learned some lessons, some hard lessons. And that's not to say the same thing won't happen again to us, but hopefully we will learn something. Okay.
Councilmember Clark?
Yeah, kind of piggyback on what everything's been said. I do think we need to demand a return on our investment. Now, that's maybe a little different return than the private sector. In the private sector, we do discounted cash flows and all that. Return on investment on public funds is a little different. For example, if we invest in the bus system, I'd like to see more people riding the buses. You know, that's kind of the purpose of buses. I do like the idea of doing some metrics on it. And I'd also throw in there, it's too early to do much here, but I think Whitaker Park, we've committed $4 million, I believe, somebody, is that about right?
Yeah.
County's committed $4 million, the private sector's come through. Now, we just voted to recommend to the council the national, whatever it is, historic designation on the building, which hopefully is going to draw some investment. But all of these, we're hoping that $4 million that we put into Whitaker Park is going to be a catalyst to revitalize that whole part of town, that area. And that's why I have said for many years the downfall or the closing of Whitaker Park is why Bell Brothers closed, and it's why Simo's closed, it's why a lot of other businesses closed. There, you had thousands of people on that side of town. I used to be in the office furniture business, and I had guys at Whitaker Park every day.
Every day.
And so that's the return on investment isn't necessarily easy to calculate, but we can certainly see it if it happens. And I think hope I live long enough to see the fruits of Whitaker
You will.
Park, and we got Miss Adams is in charge over there, so I know
You
she's
will.
working. And it's as well as the other places. I think King Shopping Center probably is the one that's been done long enough. It's probably been 2 years now.
Yeah.
That maybe we could
Longer
see.
than that.
We did some major work there on Patterson, but that business has just opened. I don't think it's too soon, I think, to see anything there. But I would look forward to learning more as Mr. Larson does as well. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, that was just for information. You've heard comments from committee and others, and so we'll see an action item for next month. All right, thank you very much. Item G4.
Item G4, resolution authorizing a $200,000 direct loan to the Housing Authority of Winston-Salem to be used for hazard abatement and demolition of the former Brown Elementary School located in the East Ward.
Yeah. This item did come before the Finance Committee on yesterday, and the Finance Committee moved this forward to the full council, 2 in favor, none opposed, and 1 abstaining. Councilmember Brooks, Mr. Brooks, will you give us a brief overview of what this action is and what the conversation was yesterday in the action? I think Councilmember Clark was the only one who was.
He's still struggling with technology over here. You might want to give him a minute.
Got to turn it up sideways.
Where do you plug it in?
You're so crazy.
Plug it in.
Well, just for the record, Mr. Bessie's still got a book over there.
Don't let him call you out like that.
Let's talk about who's progressive, who's not here.
Chief
While y'all are spinning back and forth through your buttons, I just turn the pages, and there it is.
Yeah. By the way, I was not here yesterday. I was actually with the governor presenting some volunteer awards with citizens in the state of North Carolina, but if it was covered adequately at finance, I don't have any additional questions.
Yeah. Mr. Brooks?
Yes, good afternoon. This item is an authorization of a $200,000 direct loan to the Housing Authority of Winston-Salem to be used for hazard abatement and demolition costs associated with the former Brown Elementary School. The Housing Authority acquired Brown Elementary School that 1125 Howland Avenue. They intended to apply, or they applied for a North Carolina Housing Finance Agency low-income housing tax credit loan, which was not approved, for 120 units of multifamily rental housing for the elderly. The estimated cost of the project was $12 million. The application was not selected, but they are in the process of resubmitting the application. Since they submitted the application, the structure was severely damaged by a fire, and it has become an eyesore in the community. The $200,000 request is for assistance to help with the abatement, environmental abatement, and the actual demolition of the portion of the building that was damaged by fire. If the Housing Authority is successful in receiving approval for the application they are applying for, they will repay the city from that application, from those funds, immediately. Otherwise, what they are proposing is for this to be structured as a 5-year direct payment loan, of which they're able to pay somewhere in the neighborhood of $5,000 to $10,000 over the next 5 years. At the end of that 5-year period, there will be a balloon payment or a restructuring of the loan at that time. And it's strictly for the demolition of the fire damaged portion of the property. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, questions. I know the concern that was raised yesterday was particularly in terms of the security on the city side, in terms of what happens if they're unable to pay the loan, and because we will be in first position on
Yes,
this loan?
we would be in first position. If they aren't able to pay the loan, I would imagine it would come back to the board, but there would be a foreclosure action. The city would take possession of the property and move forward as directed by council.
All right. Any questions? All right. Is there a motion?
I move approval.
I'll second.
All right. There's a move and properly second. Are there any additional questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, likewise. All right. That's unanimous. With how does that vote count, City Attorney? That was an aye. This was an aye.
No.
So what I was asking in terms of what is that?
She just not a vote because she was not here to vote.
Okay.
So go on consent.
It still goes on consent.
Still, yeah.
Well,
General.
because of finance. But
Yeah. Well, I was, for clarity, I don't know how they were going to chart that.
Three and
Yeah. It can still go on consent.
All right. I'm going to have to walk out more committee meetings. All right. G5.
Item G5, report on the 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness.
Yes, again, good afternoon. Last month, we reported that Ms. Andrea Kurtz, who's the Senior Director of Housing Strategies for the United Way of Forsyth County, would present a report on the 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness, and Ms. Kurtz is here to present that report.
Would you give your name and address for the record?
Sure. Thank you, council members. Thank you, Mr. Brooks, for having me. I'm Andrea Kurtz. I'm the Senior Director of Housing Strategies from United Way at 301 North Main Street. I will bring this up. I have a So thank you all for having me here today. I'm happy to be here to give you a report on the 10th year of the 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness. If you're keeping track, I have been. We've made a lot of progress in the last 10 years on the plan, and I hope to cover most of that today. In your packets, you should have both this PowerPoint and a summary of what we have done on the goals that were set out specifically in the plan. So just as a review, the plan was adopted by both the city and the county in 2005. And in 2006, the city approached United Way to assume a leadership role in implementing the vision and goals of the plan. At that point in time, I will say our data collection methods were a little more rudimentary. We identified about 200 chronically homeless people through our point-in-time count. And so the data that I gave related to chronically homeless will continue to use that same data source. And in 2007, we identified that there were 74 homeless vets in our community. And the plan really focused on both of these populations and trying to reduce them. The focus of the plan really is on the development of permanent supportive housing. And one of the things that the adopters of the plan really look at is that there's a group of people, particularly the chronically homeless, who are being served by the homeless service system, and for a variety of reasons, because of their length of time homelessness and complications related to their disabilities, they were getting stuck in what was supposed to be a safety net that was supposed to bounce people back up into the mainstream of our community. But we had people in our community at that point in time who'd been homeless coming in and out of our shelters for 5, 10, 20, 25 years. And so really the best practice that was being developed around the country at that point in time was called permanent supportive housing. Taking people literally off the streets, putting them in housing, and wrapping services around them. And what we have seen both in our community across the country is that that type of intervention has been very effective for this population in particular. The first project that we did as part of the 10-year plan was the ESR 5th Street project. Creatively, it's on 5th Street. This was a rehab project, developed one-bedroom apartments. They have about 12 individuals out there at any given time. They have a very low turnover in this program. A number of their residents have graduated into independent housing outside of the project. Because of the success of that project, in 2009, we opened the 5th Street Extension project, which is additional units, same project across the street. Also in 2010, we opened Hunters Hill. This is in West Salem. Hunters Hill is a 12-unit supported housing project in partnership between the North Carolina Housing Foundation, and at that point in time, it was CenterPoint Human Services. It actually has a state key subsidy that provides rent assistance for people with disabilities, predominantly people who have been chronically homeless.
Where are these located?
West Salem, they're on the corner of Hutton and Link.
Okay.
And that was, again, a great project in that neighborhood. When we first developed that project, the neighborhood was pretty nervous about our bringing chronically homeless people into their neighborhood, but I think even today the neighborhood sees it as a great asset, and the folks out there have really integrated well into that end of the neighborhood. About that same time, we started working on a project called Veterans Helping Veterans Heal. So one of the gaps we identified in our community is that while we had a large number of homeless vets in our community, we had no vet-specific services. And just because of the resources that the VA offers them, but also because for many of them, the issues and the trauma that led to their homelessness are related to their service. Having vet-specific services for them is a critical part of ending veteran homelessness. So we began work on Veterans Helping Veterans Heal. While all of our other work has really focused on permanent supportive housing, Veterans Helping Veterans Heal is the one exception to that, in that it is a transitional program. It's really designed to take vets who have pretty significant co-occurring disabilities between substance abuse and mental health, connecting them into VA services or other community-based services that will help them stabilize their health situation before moving into permanent supportive housing. I'm proud to say that VHVH is getting some really strong recognition from the VA and the work that they're doing with the vets in our community. And most of them are exiting, and I can't remember their exit rate, but most of those vets, and higher than other similar programs around the country, are exiting from that program into permanent supportive housing. Into permanent housing. Our newest project is called The Commons, which is the corner of Old Greensboro Road and 158. We purchased this property, by we I mean the North Carolina Housing Foundation purchased this property. There are 15 condominiums which are currently all occupied today. The vision of this property was that it would be a focused community, primarily serving homeless families, youth who age out of foster care, who have a very high propensity to become homeless, and are also one of the largest feeder populations in the chronic homelessness. And then also young adults on the autism spectrum who, without additional supportive services, will wind up not being able to manage housing independently. So that project has been open about a year. In addition to having the housing, one of the things that we really identified in terms of supportive services that folks needed was vocational development and vocational focus. So there are 15 households out there right now. 13 of them have elected to work with a vocational coach who's out there, and of those 13, 11 of them are currently employed, and the other 2 are continuing to look for employment. So we're very excited about that project and are looking at how to bring more folks out onto the
So, how close are you at capacity at the Commons?
No, we are not at capacity at the Commons. So on the Commons property, there's a number of different types of units. There are 15 condominiums. They are all occupied. There is a dorm with 20 SRO-style units. None of those are occupied. Had a strategy meeting this morning on how to fill those units. There's also a 2-bedroom and a 6-bedroom house. So the 6-bedroom house, we're trying to think creatively. I'm fairly positive that at some point the family shelter will have a family large enough to need that.
My apologies
so
to the
it'll be
chair.
a good resource for them. What?
I jumped out of order.
That's okay. Other questions? So one of the goals, if you remember, of the 10-year plan was to develop 598 units of supportive housing. To date, we've developed over 700 units. So we're very excited about that. What I've shown you today are examples of the ground-up builds that we've done, the tangible assets. Most of the units that we've developed are some form of housing subsidy that allow people to rent apartments in the open market with a rent subsidy. A lot of the work that we've done in the 10-year plan has really been focused on system change and how do we move people from homelessness into housing. A couple of the innovations that we have really been very proud of, one is a community intake center. So what was happening prior to the development of the community intake centers, for someone who's homeless, depending on what shelter they entered into the system with, or if they weren't in a shelter, what street outreach program they may be attached to, really opened or restricted access to supportive housing resources. So through the community intake center, we're really sort of trying to pool access to supportive housing at a community level, and we are prioritizing who's getting access into supported housing resources, which are most expensive, intensive interventions for people who are homeless, so that we can prioritize those to the people who are in most need, and we have a vulnerability assessment looking at, among other factors, health conditions, history of other trauma interventions, criminal justice interventions, health interventions, foster care interventions, weighing out into a vulnerability score, so that we can target those more appropriately. And what we've seen is that we've been able to move people through the system faster by targeting resources to those most in need. And then the other thing we've been really working with... Yep.
Mr. Bessie had a question.
I know that you've been working on 2 concepts that seem difficult to reconcile if it's not explained to folks. I know that you've got one concept where people should be able to access the same services no matter where they enter the system,
Correct.
no matter what agency. But you also have a centralized evaluation process now.
Yes.
So can you explain how those work together?
Right. So what we are doing is no matter what door you enter into connecting to people who are providing services to the homeless in our community, whether it's through street outreach, through shelter, or some other access point in our community, when we were looking at how do we make sure that no matter where you enter our system, people have equal access to the really intensive supportive housing resources, we didn't want to interfere with that. I mean, one of the things we know about our community is while we do have people who are sleeping out on the street, relative to other communities our size, we have very few. And we didn't want to interfere with the process of people entering shelter. So once people are in shelter or connected to a street outreach program, we offer an assessment, which is called the VI SPDAT, which stands for, it's a scoring, can't remember the acronym. But it looks at multiple factors that cause vulnerability if you continue to remain homeless, and it gives folks a score. And so we use that as one tool in addition to whether or not they score as chronically homeless, whether they meet the definition, or other vulnerabilities. And then later in the presentation, I'll talk about a by name list. So we, unlike when we started this work in 2005 at the Community Intake Center, we know who the
everybody in the system who's homeless, and we have a sense of where they rank in that priority order. And so target resources based on where they are in need in our community, as opposed to being in the right place at the right time when there's an opening.
Who, if I may, who does the evaluation that you're talking about?
We are in the process of changing that, and up until recently, it has been primarily based on whoever their first point of contact is, so we can do that evaluation quickly. What we're seeing is that by having so many access points, your assessment really varies depending on who's doing your assessment. So at the Community Intake Center, we have currently 2. We're about to add another staff person to make 4 staff people who can do those evaluations. So we'll have 2 people specializing in it. So as we see people come in new into the system, we'll be able to dispatch a couple of people out to do those assessments. Any other questions about coordinated assessment?
Mr. Clark? I volunteer regularly at the Samaritan Ministries, and so I know that population group better than others, and Mr. Montgomery manages one right up the street. I have often been puzzled or curious as to how many of those people can truly be mainstreamed in the sense of rehabilitated to the point that they can be self-supporting. You know, renting an apartment, for example, you got to clean it, wash the sheets, cook, all those type things, get a job, etc. How successful have you been in getting these people, maybe mainstream's not the right term, whatever you would use, but in getting these people back to being able to hold a job and to take care of themselves and to manage their lives?
Yeah, I mean, we've been incredibly successful. I mean, I think we have about as a community, a 92% success rate, getting people into housing and keeping them in that housing past the year mark.
Okay, and the housing you said you had 700 units or something.
Yeah.
Is that their permanent housing, or do you move them on to something else so that someone else can take that place?
So the bulk of that is permanent housing.
For them, it's their
For
permanent.
them.
Yeah.
So it's their permanent housing. For many of the subsidies, what we have tried to create is a system of flow on those subsidies. So as individuals have been in that subsidy for a while, if they get to the place where they are economically self-sufficient and don't need the subsidy, then we can pull that subsidy away. If they continue not, and many of the folks that we are working with have very severe disabilities.
Oh, I'm aware of that.
They can maintain themselves, they can care for themselves, but beyond that, their disability prevents sort of any regular economic activity that's productive for them. And they'll be on subsidies for a long period of time, and we have a partnership with the Housing Authority that moves them from service-intensive vouchers really focused on serving chronically homeless people to more of the housing choice voucher, which is really just supporting their housing once they've reached that point of being self-sufficient in terms of maintaining their apartment, maintaining their ability to be in the community and keep that housing as long as they have the economic subsidy.
So when I was at it's probably been 2 months or so since I was there were 60, 70 people there, whatever their bed count is. So I could anticipate I could go back a year later, and most likely most of those would be in some type of private housing or your housing,
so
somewhat self-sufficient.
Right. So our longer-term vision, which we're not anywhere near it yet, is to make sure that people who become homeless in our community can get rehoused in 30 days.
Okay.
Most of the people, what we know already about our system is about 50% of the people who become homeless that you would see any given day at a shelter will self-resolve in 2 weeks or less. Okay. So we're really talking about half the people in the shelter system at any given time who need something more. And
those half are typically have some family support or something too?
They typically have family support. They may have a job and something just crazy happened. They may have had a fire, right? They may have had something crazy happen in their family and they needed a few nights while they regrouped. And so that other half of the system is what we're really looking at. And then another larger chunk, and I don't know the percentages, of those folks need something less than long-term support. So one of the programs we developed is called Rapid Rehousing, and it's a short to medium-term subsidy that will work with households anywhere between 1 month and 24 months. And it's really designed at providing some light housing support, so it may be some tenancy supports, making sure their rent and utilities get paid while they look for work, while they stabilize in their job, while they may address some health issues that may not be the head of household, could be their kids, could be other people in the household. And they do very well with that, and then we see very little recidivism out of that.
Okay, thank you.
And that program has about a 95% exit to permanent housing.
Okay, thank you.
So one of the other things that we know is that folks who are homeless and struggling with, where am I sleeping tonight? What am I eating tonight? Where are my belongings? It's then also very difficult for them to find housing. So another innovation that we had was housing placement days, where we bring a lot of service providers and landlords who have open units into one room, and then bring folks who are actively looking for housing into that room, either to connect with service providers and or landlords on that day. And we've been seen some really good results out of that, and been able with those events to house pretty quickly to 20 to 30 people out of an event where it would have taken those folks 4, 5, 6 weeks to get housed out of that.
Excuse me, Andrea, would you, how much more you have left on your presentation? I'm just checking from a time standpoint. I know there's another item on, and we probably won't resolve that next item on tonight, but I know there are folks who are
I just have
here
a
for that.
couple more slides.
Okay.
The other thing that we've done working with of care is a process of continuous quality improvement. So the COC meets quarterly, looking at the work that we're doing, evaluating it, and trying to improve on it to make sure that we are constantly meeting the needs of people who are homeless, to get them into housing and keep them stable in housing. And that was our quality improvement seminar. The really exciting work that we've done in 2015, we were recognized by USICH and HUD as having ended veterans homelessness. And by that, what we were recognized for is creating a system that if a veteran becomes homeless in our community, we can get them housed in under 30 days. And I'm proud to say that, except for the vets who are engaged at Veterans Helping Veterans Heal, which is a 2-year program, because it's transitional, still count as homeless. Except for those folks, if we identify a homeless vet, we can get them housed pretty rapidly. We're also continuing to work on the the issue of ending chronic homelessness. This is just a dashboard looking at our housing placement rate. So between January of 2015 and October of 2016, we housed 176 people who met the definition of chronic homelessness. This is just sort of to show you that the data collection that we used in the point in time count is a snapshot. And what we're seeing on an everyday basis over the course of a year is a much greater volume of chronically homeless people than that snapshot would have otherwise alluded to. Like I said, we keep a by name list, so we know who in our homeless system through coordinated assessment is homeless, in need of more intensive housing supports than just emergency shelter or some encouragement kind of interventions. And that has really helped us. And what we've been able to see from this is who's chronically homeless, how we prioritize them. And at this point, we have about 40 people in the community who are identified as chronically homeless. This is a comparison just so you can kind of see the volume of data. The orange chart is our annual homeless assessment count. So when we look at that data between 2009 and 2016, what we see is a pretty significant reduction in the number of people who are coming in our community for homeless services. So it's a pretty consistent reduction. It's about 23% reduction. That blue bottom line is actually the point in time count. So what you can see, and we've been keeping that data since 1996, is this population has been very flat. And it's the subpopulations within it that change. And so what we're really hoping to change is the number of people on any given night who are chronically homeless, so that we have a much more flexible, resilient system. This is just, and you can look at this more further, is the funds that we've leveraged through the 10-year plan, bringing into the community to help service people who are homeless. The non-recurring funds are primarily things that have gone into construction of projects, and the recurring funds are probably predominantly funding staff and housing subsidies. What we've seen looking at the point in time count from 2005 to the point in time count of 2017 was a 73% reduction in chronic homelessness, which is great, and we're excited and we're happy about that, but we are still driving towards zero. So we've been really working with the COC on how do we get those last 40 people housed. We've developed over 700 new units and had a 28% of our scores, 28% decrease in our annual count of homeless people. We are looking at developing a new strategic plan. We're hoping to develop a plan that's very data-driven. I think Councilmember Bessie, you were on the commission for a while and saw our frustrations with data. We are in a very different world now, so we really are trying to be very data-driven in the work that we do. We're looking to set some bold yet achievable goals and support our community in being a high-performing COC. So as we continue to apply for HUD funds that are available to serve people who are homeless, we are extremely competitive.
All right, thank you. Questions? Councilmember Bessie Adams?
COC, continuum of care.
Yes, COC is a continuing care. And that's the planning body for homeless services in the community.
Councilmember Adams?
Yes. Good to see you guys again. As always, I guess I just beat this drum to death, but it is what it is. The continuing of care and the 10-year plan people, they're two different groups, no?
Not anymore. When I started this work, there
In
was
what, in 15?
When I started this work in 2005, there was a continuum of care, and then the city and county created a joint commission to oversee the implementation of the 10-year plan. And that did not, eventually we looked at the governance of how homeless services were being planned for in the community, and we created a governance document which was adopted in 2012 by the city and county that,
In 2015?
no, earlier than 2015.
Okay.
Maybe.
So it was in your report, it's saying, and maybe it's just the wording.
Okay.
It's saying that the COC adopted a formal governance structure which empowered the Commission on Ending Homelessness as the governing body for the COC.
Yes.
Okay, which created an operating cabinet which oversees the operations of the COC system. What I'm asking for is what it sounds like there are some different bodies doing things.
Yes.
I would like to see the information, Mr. Garrity, on who these people are in all of these bodies. I'm also always looking for the past years, and Mr. Brooks knows I've always wondered and how the performance of the continuing of care was for the city and what our expectations are and what were the outcomes. When it comes to budget time and the money, you know, everybody wants their piece, but nobody really can tell me what it is we've been doing. And I will never get off of that until I can understand it and see it, and whether that's through data or whatever. Because when we say that we basically ended homelessness and it's down by whatever the percentage is, you know, at the end of the day, there are people who are always going to be homeless. That's because that's their choice. They don't like to live by the rules. They don't want to be in the house where they can't do what they want to do under supervision. It's not going to happen. I'm interested in seeing those numbers of people who are, we call them chronic. They don't call it chronic. They just call it being a free spirit. I'm doing what I want to do. I want to see those types of numbers because there's a difference in chronic homelessness and somebody who wants to be out there. And I don't necessarily call it homeless. Again, I just call it that a person that likes to see the sky and have their own will. That's how I see it. I'm still trying to understand again. I went with the mayor last year to D.C. to get the award, whatever, from the, at that time, First Lady Obama, about us in our quest to end veterans' homelessness. Again, I think we've done a tremendous job, but I've said for the past 8 years, going on 9, I've been on this council, that the numbers and the data just doesn't add up. And I see that you said that now we're in a different place and we're going to have more data and whatever. But that data needs to be linked to some outcomes and some goals. I know we have goals, but again, as a council and the general body of this city, 99% of the people have no clue as to what is going on. we got all this money that flows out to all these agencies, and then we got all these other agencies that do, as Councilmember Clark said today, coming back from Raleigh, to people that are really in the trenches doing some other type of real work, that they don't get anything. So as we move forward, Mr. Garrity, I would like for Chair Montgomery for this to come back. We need to get another report on this, and it needs to be more than what we've been seeing, to me, for the past 7-8 years. It's good to have information, but if the information is not really tied to what I have to see as a person to do my job, then I'm always question continuum of care, United Way, Bethesda, and everybody else is in this loop as to how this is being done. I think if I called in a consultant to look at how we really do this, we might not like what they're saying as to our results that we think we have, but we're not going to get there yet because I know everybody's working hard to make this successful. But as the council member said earlier, we need metrics that we understand. You can have metrics, but if you don't understand them, they're just that. They're just on paper. I'm done.
Councilman McIntosh.
I'm relatively new to this world of sort of formal homelessness, the effort towards solving the problem, and I attend the continuum of care meetings as often as I can, and it's a bewildering world. I mean, it is truly amazing how many different organizations are involved in the process, and so I'm learning it as I go along, and I know there's a lot of man hours and a lot of effort put towards it, and I really appreciate all the work that goes into it. I think it's probably from an overview standpoint evident that we've made progress, but is it all the progress that we need to make? Can we do it more efficiently? Those are all questions I think are worth asking.
I'm happy to get whatever data it is that you are looking for. I think, the task of the 10-year plan was really to focus very targetedly on the chronic population, and the metrics that I presented today is very focused on that work because that was the plan we were adopting. In the work that we're doing to identify what the new goals are, you'll see some very different metrics, and what we are looking at in those metrics, and we're still working on the plan but the continuum of care is very dedicated to making sure that if somebody becomes homeless, that we have a way as a community to get them reached quickly. And, when we started this work and started looking at how long people were in our system, we were seeing people on average in our system for over 100 days. We are now at under 45 days. That's not good enough to us. It's not good enough to the COC. We're continuing to drive that number down. But I would say that our continuum of care is an incredible planning body, an incredibly large group of community service providers, community individuals, who are all dedicated to making sure that when people lose housing, they have a path back into it.
Thank you. Councilman Clark.
This is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. Would you mind, at your convenience, emailing me through my city email your name and phone number? I'd love to talk to you in detail about it, but not tonight. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Andrew, for your work. And I say that one of the challenges I think that individuals, and whether it's the 10-year plan, the CLC, or anyone talks about homelessness and the work itself, is the language that's used and the general public's understanding of what that means. Because we talk chronic homelessness, most folks will have no idea what chronic homelessness means. And then even when they hear the individuals say that veteran homelessness has ended, they don't understand what that means when they can engage with a person who may have been dishonorably discharged from the military, yet they are unable to access certain services. So I think part of that is some language things and how things are crafted that may help individuals understand a bit better the landscape that is not always an even keel understanding of what's out there. All right. Thank you. All right. Item G6, and Councilman Bessie is out of the room, so we can go as long as we want. Okay.
Item G6, ordinance amendment proposed by Planning and Development Services, amending Chapter B of the Unified Development Ordinances to amend standards for the Winston Overlay Zoning District, UDO 275.
Good afternoon, council members. This text amendment is proposed by Planning and Development Services staff and it would revise the UDO to amend Winston Overlay District standards. Just to give you some background on this amendment, in 2010, Council adopted standards creating the Winston Overlay District for the core of downtown. And what these standards did is they promoted new development and redevelopment that's compatible with the existing urban character of downtown. And the current Winston Overlay standards are very simple. They do 4 things. First of all, they require a 0-foot front setback for new buildings, so those buildings in the core of downtown are right on the sidewalk like the existing buildings there. They require parking to be located to the rear of the buildings, so again, you have an urban pattern of development rather than a more suburban form of development with parking being the first thing you see. They require 1 door per 100 feet of street frontage to make sure pedestrians can access these buildings. And lastly, the standards require a minimum of 50% of the ground floor be transparent, and that would be, of course, through windows or doors, things of that nature. For buildings that can't meet these standards, an alternative compliance provision was built into the ordinance to allow unique alternatives to these standards that still meet the intent of that urban character. Just briefly to show you, the area outlined in blue on the map is where the Winston Overlay District boundaries are. Those boundaries are not proposed to change as part of this amendment, but it's basically the area around what I would call kind of the elbow of the center of downtown, the areas along 4th and Trade, and then a few streets on either side of those streets. So what this proposed amendment would do is establish 5 tweaks to the existing Winston Overlay standards, and I'll just summarize these and then we'll go into it a little bit more detail. But the first would be requiring ground floor residential units to be raised above street level. The second would be establishing basic parking structure design standards. Third would be requiring 25% facade transparency for upper levels of street-facing facades, in addition to that 50% ground floor transparency already in the code. Next would be prohibiting overstreet walkways above key streets in the overlay district. And lastly, we're proposing to tweak rules for certain types of signage in the district. So starting off with the requirement for residential units to be grade separated at least 3 feet from street level. If you look at this image that my cursor's on right here in the middle of the slide, this is your classic kind of northeastern East Coast row house that has been one of the typical forms of urban housing for the last 150 years or so. And one thing you'd notice about this type of development is there's always some grade separation. Units are usually separated several steps above the street level, and that's to provide some privacy for folks living in those residential units, knowing that they're in close proximity to busy pedestrian sidewalks. The image on the right-hand side of the slide is a newer development in downtown Charlotte that picks up on this same pattern. And the image on the left hand of the slide is what we're trying to avoid with this ordinance. You can see, hopefully you can see on the slide, there's some brown dirt sedimentation that's actually washed up onto this patio, this private space from a heavy rain. And in addition to things like that happening, you also have no privacy if you're in that unit, which presumably has either the living room or dining room behind those doors. Someone can be walking on the sidewalk and you're inside trying to have some privacy, and the only thing you can do is what these folks in the image did, which is close their blinds. So if you can have your residential unit set a few feet above ground level, that really helps establish that balance between privacy and connectedness. The next requirement that we're talking about is adding a 25...
Kirk, I got a question on that one specifically. Typically, in that center picture, in a lot of cases where you have that sort of that urban design, you also have basement units.
Mm-hmm.
This would not preclude you from having a basement.
Correct, Councilmember McIntosh. That wouldn't be prohibited.
It would be prohibited?
It would not be prohibited.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
They're called garden apartments, and my daughter has one.
Right.
Yeah.
And they're very expensive in big cities.
Yes, they are.
The next requirement would be dealing with adding a 25% street-facing facade transparency requirement for the upper floors of buildings. Again, as I mentioned previously, the ordinance currently allows what you see on the right-hand side of the screen, which is 50% or greater ground floor transparency, but currently someone could do what we see here, which is completely brick in the upper floors of a building because we have no upper floor transparency protection. What we're trying to see is what you can see at this shot of 4th Street here and the Nissen building, where the residential units actually have some transparent windows, albeit smaller than what you see in the storefront windows on the ground level. And this image in the middle of the slide is another one I found on Google Images that I think is a really good example of transparency throughout all of those floors. But again, we've talked to our folks in building and inspections and make sure that this is good with the building code. They think 25% is very easy to meet, and we've also talked to folks in the development community that think this is a reasonable requirement. The third requirement would be establishing design standards for parking structures, and this would be two separate things. The first would be requiring 50% of the ground floor of parking decks to be wrapped in an active use. You can see the images on the right-hand side of the screen have retail space. This is an Orvis store, and this one in Northern Virginia. And this one is actually in Cary, North Carolina, under construction now, has yet to be occupied. But you can see from the transparent facades there that they're setting that deck up to have retail in it as well. We think it's important to have these active uses on the ground floor of parking decks, just so when you're going down a block, your pedestrian rhythm isn't being broken up by the sudden expanse of concrete columns 60 feet on center with cars in the middle. We want to really preserve that pedestrian interactivity in this core area of downtown. The second aspect of this requirement would be that upper levels of parking decks must have attractive design elements, and the ordinance leaves it pretty flexible. You could do something as in this middle image here, what's called a shimmer wall, which is acrylic or plastic panels that flap in the wind.
I like that.
Or you could do something more traditional, such as banners or even brick columns and decorative detailing. Anything that just enlivens that facade, so again, it's just not a utilitarian concrete structure. The next requirement of the ordinance would be prohibiting over-street walkways over 8 streets in the district, those being 4th, 5th, Trade, Liberty, Main, Cherry, Marshall, and Spruce. And you can see from these images of Charlotte, where they actually had a significant program of this in the 1980s that some of you may recall. It really took away from the pedestrian vibrancy of those streets that had the over-street walkways, and a lot of those still haven't recovered in those blocks. We're trying to avoid that here, and in talking with the downtown community, we're not really aware of any plans to add these type of over-street walkways on these 8 streets. So it's a simple solution, but it protects us from someone coming in from out of town who suddenly tries to install one of these things, and then it takes away some of the vibrancy we built up in that block. The last element of this ordinance would be tweaks to the sign code. The first would be allowing flashing neon signs in the overlay district to complement downtown's traditional urban character. These images I took from Nashville, Tennessee, and for those of you who've been there, you know they have a lot of attractive neon signage, whether it's in the form of wall signage or projecting signs that go out over the sidewalk. The Downtown Partnership has really indicated that this is the type of character they would want to see in downtown, rather than the alternative, which is the electronic message signs. Both of these types of signs are designed to attract attention in an illuminated way, but this code would actually prohibit electronic message signs in the overlay district to reduce visual clutter. The exception being stadiums, coliseums, exhibition centers. Those would be facilities like the Millennium Center or the Stevens Center or the Convention Center. Those would be allowed to have electronic signage through a special provision that applies citywide currently, and that would be retained in the downtown as well, given the unique nature of those uses. So overall, significant public input was received on the proposed ordinance. Our staff met with the Downtown Winston-Salem Planning Committee, and unfortunately, the committee's chairman, Charles Wilson, was going to be here in case any questions arose, but he had to leave. We also presented to the Downtown Partnership Executive Committee. We presented this to the full Downtown Partnership Board, and we also had a drop-in meeting at the Stewart Building where we had attendance by realtors, parking operators, residents, the Triad Apartment Association came, and also a couple of council members came as well. And again, we heard general support for all of these changes and just support from all the stakeholders we encountered. We did have a planning board public hearing on this amendment in April of this year. No opposition was heard, and Mr. Thiel from the Downtown Partnership did submit a letter of support, but that was the only communication we got on this ordinance whatsoever, and the board unanimously recommended approval of the amendment. I'll be glad to answer any questions at this time, but this is scheduled for a public hearing at your June council meeting.
Are there any questions? Councilmember Bessie?
Yeah, I missed the flashing neon sign. Where is that in the code language?
Let me find that specific section.
Okay.
It's towards the back of the document.
Yeah, okay, I found it. I found it. The first time I read through this, I noticed the restriction on electronic message boards, but I missed the flashing. I find it hard to believe that you didn't get objections to the flashing neon sign.
This is something that on the Downtown Partnership Planning Committee, we've had several discussions on this over the years that I've been involved with the Planning Committee, and it's always something that at least some of the more commercially oriented folks on that committee have really had an interest in having restaurants and things of that nature with this type of signage.
Okay. I can copy that. Okay.
Mr. Thiel, did you want to make a comment there? Sure. Name and address for the record.
Jason Thiel, 305 West 4th Street. I work as the president of the Downtown Partnership, and the projecting sign was something that we weren't even able to have in downtown until about 5 years ago. So that projecting sign is a classic downtown type of sign. It's something that, I don't know when it happened, but when we removed it, we were trying to emulate suburban scale wall signage, but we lost what was really unique about our urban signage from a much earlier time. The neon sign is limited to size, so the Nashville sign there probably isn't going to get built here because they're limited to 24 square foot of face on both sides, and there's also several limitations about how far they can project from the curb. But that sign, the Nashville sign right there, would be enigmatic of a very urban environment, would be very welcome from everybody I've talked to downtown. And although some people may say it's flashy, it is entirely downtown and unique and urban, and it looks a lot like some of the theater signs that we had in downtown Winston-Salem at the turn of the before the
60s.
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, I have got nobody but why can't we do this? One thing I will share though is that they're very expensive, so I don't expect to see a lot of them. So that's one thing I will say.
Mr. McIntosh?
There's a group of people that on a pretty regular basis criticize whatever's going on downtown, and many of them were in attendance at the meeting. We talked about this over at the Stewart Building, and even they were in support of it. So kind of from every quarter, I've heard nothing but thumbs up, especially on the neon side of it. So I'm highly in favor of it. Thank you.
Because we made adjustments with the Mass General signage. Is that not correct?
Thank you, and that's a great question. And that's a good example of a lit projecting sign, but not the full-blown neon.
Yeah. Councilman Adams?
I'm all for it. I personally think our downtown looks dark at night. And as much money as businesses and people and tourists that come down there, I always thought we should have had more of this because it just needs some more light. And I think the neon signage and the flashing whatever in the downtown will be just another shot in the arm that Winston-Salem downtown needs to have. I don't really know what Greensboro has. I know Charlotte's got a little. You go to Greenville, Columbia, you see it. But I think because we're a small urban center, we're like a big town urban center. Again, I remember when I was growing up, you're right, the drugstores, everybody had it. The theaters, the stores themselves, whether it was Tallheimers, whether it was Arcade, all of them down there had these type signs. So I would look forward to seeing that downtown. I think that would be another thing we could tout when we are advertising with the tourism board, when we take the nighttime shots. I think this would be a good backdrop for us.
Councilman Larson?
Somebody mentioned CMOs.
Yeah.
And I think one of the questions, which was a little pig running and the guy
Right, it was Simos. Simos.
Agreed.
It's an art form. I think well done, any design, sign design, and
Any other questions? Anything else?
I like it.
All right. This is for action?
This is just a briefing for your June meeting. You'll be able to make a motion on it then.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for your for information tonight. Look forward to it. I will use my prerogative just to say one. I think, and I thought Councilmember Adams was taking a shot at Charlotte when she said Charlotte has a little. You know, their slogan is Charlotte has a lot. But I say that to say that I think that again, as we continue to see investments in downtown, I think we're at a great place of things happening and things meshing together, particularly of the ability that many have had their hands in helping, and Jason and others who've had great work downtown for many, many years, in the fact that there are parts that are merging together, and so you don't just have one street in downtown any longer, but you have communities that are converging, and I think that sets us apart from some other places that are moving along, such as a Greensboro and others, where some of their downtown activity areas are just disjointed from one another. But I think for us, we've been able to do a good job of seeing those merge together, and with more things like this, we continue to create that continuity in different parts of downtown. So thank you and all the others for their good work.
This needs a vote. Does this need a vote?
No, it doesn't because it's going to council on
First Monday in June.
Yeah.
So it doesn't?
No,
Oh, it
Secretary hung me out to dry.
Okay. Okay. Said it's for information?
Yep.
So, all right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. With that being said, we've completed the agenda for today, and we will get ready to adjourn Public Works.
Public Works will begin at 6:15.
All right, we're adjourned.
Dee Dee, I can't